The motherboard that's hiding in this system here is the Gigabyte B360 Gaming 3 Wi-Fi. It's a rather impressive new lineup from Gigabyte, or from Intel in general. We're going to take a look at it, so do stick around. Now this is definitely a budget offering for the Intel lineup, especially the 8th generation Coffee Lake CPUs, as those are the only ones that are supported on this chipset specifically. Now these, the board itself is actually a slim form factor, still ATX, but it uses a couple of M-ATX mounting brackets or mounting points in the center, and otherwise is a little bit loose on the top and the bottom side, as there isn't any mounting points for those, so just bear that in mind. So I should expect with a motherboard that only supports Intel's 8th generation Coffee Lake CPUs, it does use an LGA 1151 socket. You also have 4 DDR4 RAM DIMM slots available to you, which is actually quite nice, even though this is a relatively slim ATX board. And you do also have a heat-sinked M.2 slot just below the CPU socket, which, while is blocked through the airflow path from the RAM DIMM slots there, you do have, if you have a CPU air cooler, some pretty decent thermals available, since the heatsink that comes on, to cover it is actually fairly thick, has a nice thermal pad on the bottom, has a little bit of sort of heat-sinking design, so you should be pretty well off with that. Speaking of M.2 slots, the datasheet that Gigabyte gave me for this board basically said that there's only one M.2 SSD slot available for the B360 chipset. Seems like Gigabyte's kind of thrown that out the window though, because at the bottom of the motherboard there's actually a second M.2 SSD slot. This one is only an X2 connection, whereas the top one is an X4, but it is available to you. It says that it supports both PCIe and SATA SSDs, so while you won't get the full throughputs, you can still use 2 M.2 SSDs in this if you fancy. And technically there is a third M.2 slot on the board. It's in the center next to the CMOS battery, but it's not your standard M.2 slot that you're going to be using with an M.2 SSD. This one is used for the new Intel CNVI Wi-Fi modules. These are pretty interesting. They're incredibly fast. They claim a total, well, they're 802.11ac, so they claim total of 1733 megabits per second, I think. It's still massively fast, as you'd expect. It's also 2x2 multi-user MIMO, which is also really nice to see. And while the board itself, obviously being the Wi-Fi availability, the Wi-Fi model, comes with the module built in the box, the rest of the motherboards, all the B360 and H370 chipsets and motherboards that Gigabyte and a lot of other vendors are releasing right now, should all have the CNVI M.2 ports or slot on here. So if you did want to add it in at later dates, if you don't specifically pick up the Wi-Fi module, it should still be supported. In terms of PCIe configuration, the top slot is a reinforced X16 slot, which is obviously designed for your graphics card, and that's pretty much it. There are plenty of other ports available here, but as far as I'm aware, they all go through the chipset as opposed to directly to the CPU, unlike the top slot, which does. Now this means that you're not going to be able to SLI graphics cards on these boards at all, and while you may be able to crossfire them because the connections are all going through the chipset, which has the DMI 3.0 link, which I think is generally equivalent to about 4 PCIe lanes, you're really not going to be getting much of a fast connection here, so just bear that in mind. If you do fancy crossfiring, it's probably not the best board to do it with. Taking a bit of a tour of the board, at the top you have an 8-pin CPU power connector to power those relatively high power 6-core chips that are available for these boards. The VRM configuration, I don't have a specific note for this specific board. Obviously it has to be well enough to be able to power even an 8700K to its full boost clock, but because overclocking isn't supported on these boards, while they do have some interesting overclocking support in the BIOS, you're not going to be overclocking that hard on these, even if you do have an unlocked chip on these locked boards. On the top right you have 2 RGB LED connectors. One of them is a digital connector, another one is an RGBW. You actually have another set of those down at the bottom left next to your audio header, where you can again have a digital or an RGBW header connected. Now the board does have 6 SATA ports available to you, although 4 of them are upright, so just bear that in mind. And obviously with the M.2 configurations, depending on what you're using, some of them may be disabled, so make sure to check the manual depending on if you are or aren't using M.2 SSDs. The other thing to mention is that the rear I/O, which is actually fairly plentiful. You have 4 USB 2 ports, a couple of USB 3 and Type-C and Type 3.1 ports as well, and some display connectors available, and obviously 7.1 audio support, which is nice to see. If you're using the CMVI module, the Wi-Fi module that with this specific board it does come in the box, you will actually have some of the USB 2 ports disabled, so bear that in mind when you're trying to connect your keyboard and mouse to USB 2 and it just straight up doesn't work because you have the Wi-Fi module installed. Jumping into the BIOS, I was actually really surprised to see a fair number of overclocking options available here, especially since this is a locked CPU and a locked motherboard. The spec sheet that they gave me also said that B360 boards don't support XMP profiles, but this board seems to support it just fine. So again, I feel like that's a value add that Gigabyte is adding to their BIOSes, kind of, I suppose, in fighting Intel here, but it seems to be a functional option, so that's nice to see. You'd obviously have the fairly standard layout for Gigabyte motherboards, including all of your advanced options, all of your, kind of SmartFan 5 softwares and stuff, both in the BIOS and in Windows. So kind of a nice bit of functionality. It's, again, a decent enough layout. Just make sure that you plug in your keyboard and mouse to the working USB ports if you have the CMVI module plugged in. So what do I think of the board? Well, if you're buying a budget system or you're building your own budget system, but you really don't care for overclocking that much, and you're going for a locked chip like the 8600 non-K that's in this system right now, then I think this is going to be a pretty decent shout. There is the H370 option available for a little bit more connectivity, a little bit better overall design, a little bit better power phase design and stuff like that as well. So if you do want to go for that, feel free. But if you're really on the budget conscious option and you don't want to go for the H210, I think, then you actually want some level of features available, then you can do that. Stuff like Octane is still supported on this. Obviously you still have 4 DDR4 RAM DIMM slots available, so there's a fair bit of kind of options available to you, so it's certainly not too bad. But with that said, I'd love to hear what you think about it in the comments down below. Is this the sort of board you'd be interested in picking up yourself, or is this kind of too low end for you? You're going to stick with a Z370 or even stick with Ryzen? Let me know in those comments down below. I'd love to hear from you. But with all of that out of the way, let's take a look at the scoring. For me, this is a 4.5 value for money with a 4.5 for performance as well. Functionality is going to be a 4, as is styling, and I think as is the TechteamGB score as well, with a Budget Buster award. It's a really impressive motherboard for the price that you're going to pay for it. Obviously the B360 chipset does have some inherent problems compared to the B350 chipset on the AMD side, with things like, well, strict overclocking or lack of overclocking support, which can be a bit of a pain. Also a little bit limited functionality in terms of your PCIe configurations, and of course disabling USB 2 ports is a little bit of a strange option when using that built-in Wi-Fi module, so just bear that in mind. And yeah, otherwise it's still a pretty impressive motherboard. If you'd like to know any more about the board, to take a look at pricing, when and where you watch this, take a look at the link in the description down below. That will take you to your local Amazon store, where hopefully it will give you some relevant information for you. In terms of supporting the channel, feel free to do that too in the links in the description down below, with either the Patreon link where you can support me directly, or the Amazon and Overclockers UK affiliate links, which massively help me out when you use those links to buy from those places. You can also check out the merch, which I'm not actually wearing today, or plenty of other stuff down there too. If you're new to the channel, feel free to hit that subscribe button. I post videos every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and now Saturdays for the Tech FAQ series, and otherwise that is pretty much it. There will be some other videos over here for you to check out. Thank you for watching. If you've got any questions, leave them in the comments down below, and otherwise we'll see you all in the next video.